dress.
Yeah. we dressed up blue today.
Blue Jacket Brigade.
Yep.
Thank you. And also my good friend Bakshi for helping to organise today, and of course Dale Stevens for being such a great representative here in Christchurch for the National Party. Before I start, I just want to tell you a quick story which might give you some insight into me, what happened to me yesterday. I was in my electorate office and a man came to visit me. He is from Vietnam. He's an older gentleman, he's been in New Zealand for quite a while, and he is a mechanical engineer, top of his field in Vietnam. He was working on huge energy projects, massive, the scale of which we don't even do here in New Zealand. But because he was overqualified and his English perhaps wasn't so great, he never got to work here. So he started in New Zealand all those years ago by installing tiles, and his partner started doing nails. He now owns 3 tiling companies and 3 nail salons throughout New Zealand. He employs many New Zealanders. He's probably the most overqualified tiler in this country. And the reason I tell you this story is because my grandfather came to, my opa actually, he's Dutch. I never met him because he died before I was born, but he came to this country in 1952 from Holland on the boat, and he was a chemical engineer and worked minimum wage jobs at the old New Zealand Telegraph and Post because that was all he could do. Again, extremely overqualified, and that probably resonates with many of you here today. I am the daughter of a migrant. My father came here on that boat when he was 5, and I've heard all of these stories. And the issues that they faced back then are very similar to the issues that many of you face today. So that is how I grew up with those stories being told. And I asked for this portfolio. I wasn't given it. Judith didn't turn up and say, I'd like you to do immigration. I specifically asked for this portfolio because of my background, because I know that this country is built on migrants who come here and work extremely hard and add to not only our economy but our culture and our society, and are so important. But also because I knew that COVID had caused problems with immigration, but also because I knew immigration was in a complete mess. And I don't think that's of any surprise to any of you, and it has been for a few years now. Some of the issues that we're facing today have been growing for a while. And there were ministers back in 2018 who were mentioning some of these issues that were on the horizon, yet nothing's been done. And here we are today in a pretty awful situation for a number of reasons. And I'll go over those today. I don't want to talk for the whole time, but what I want to do is I'll give you a bit of an overview. And then the reason that I'm here is to talk with you. I've met some of you already, and I'm going to be sticking around till 1 o'clock. So if you want to talk to me afterwards about your stories, that's what I'm here for. And also afterwards we'll take questions, and also you might not have a question, you might just want to say, hey, what about us? What about this group? And that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to listen because as you will have seen, I've made a little bit of an inroad into this government, but there is a lot more work to do. And the reason I'm doing this tour of the country is to get feedback on where I go next and where some of the issues lie, because I get a lot of emails and a lot of communications, and if some of you have emailed me or messaged me and I haven't responded, I apologise. It's just that I get about 100 a day at the moment, and it's really tough to keep up. I'm trying my best, so I will get there. It's just taking a bit of time. So I guess that there are two, if I separate the issues out, there are 2 sort of main groups of issues. Now, when I came into this role, the first issue that sort of landed on my doorstep, I guess, was the split migrant families. And the people who've been separated from their loved ones for a really long time, who were expecting when they came to New Zealand to be reunited pretty quickly after they started a job or finished their study, and would bring their loved ones here, and that has just not happened. And we find ourselves over a year later, many of these people haven't held their children in a really long time. And I was just talking to one of you beforehand who is working in an early childhood centre, looking after our children every single day, and her 6-year-old daughter, who was supposed to be here, who she hasn't seen since she was 4, is stuck overseas. And, you know, both of us, I think, we're trying not to tear up, because that is the reality of the situation we're facing. It's a pretty big stinking pile of rubbish that we have in our own backyard in this country that is not being acknowledged. So when I got the portfolio, I spoke to a number of nurses. I spoke to about 50 actually in person, night after night I'd call them. And the reason that I chose nurses, and I know a lot of you will have said, why is she just focusing on nurses? There are a lot of others who are also affected. And I want just to reassure you that I knew that. But I picked nurses because I knew if I went to the minister and said, look at all of these people who are separated from their families, he would have said, oh, it's too many and we need to keep New Zealanders safe and all that rubbish that he always says. And we would have not gotten anywhere. And so the reason I chose nurses was because I needed the New Zealand public on my side. I needed every person in New Zealand to go, hang on a minute, we've got 1,000 nurses short in this country. We're about to undertake the biggest vaccination program in our history. These women came here, they haven't seen their children in over a year, and that gets every single mother in New Zealand upset. And also on top of that, there was that anomaly where if they came before the borders closed, they couldn't bring their families, but everyone who came after could. So it was this really unfair situation, and every Kiwi in New Zealand, I knew, has a sense of decency and fairness and would go, hey, that's not right. And so I got the media on board, and we managed through Tova O'Brien to get a whole lot of stories up, and these brave nurses went on the news. And frankly, it's disgusting that I had to get nurses on the news crying over their children they hadn't seen in a year to get the minister to do anything. And it didn't sit well with me, but that's what we had to do. And I'm so grateful to them that they did that, and they, it's a pretty brave thing to go on the news and cry about your children and show photos. It's pretty tough. But they did that, and it took a while. I mean, this is back in February. And we put a lot of pressure on the minister in the House and through speeches that you may have seen, and just giving him, a lot of pressure every day. And finally, they came up with a solution. And what my intention always was to say, right, the nurses would open the door to the other groups who haven't, seen their children as well. And so we had a little bit of movement. So he's created a category for those nurses, and he's created another category for people who had visas to travel but weren't able to. And then there's another category of people who earn a truckload of cash, who clearly miss their children more than everybody else. Doesn't, again, sit well with me. But those are the issues we've got. And he chose a very small portion. We've got the nurses, that's great. He missed a whole lot of other nurses, though, who are here, who are residents, who are on post-study work visas. They're all missed out. So we're going to start writing to him and giving him more pressure on those nurses who missed out. But we've also now got all of the other people, like my teacher, who teaches math at Hutt Valley High School, Cam Conradi. Many of you will have seen him. He's quite vocal on Twitter and in the media. He only earns 70,000 or 70-something thousand. So he, is not included in that group because he didn't have his applications through and processed. So there's a lot more work to do, and I understand that, but we've opened the door. That was the key, that was what we wanted, and that's what we did. And now is the next step to everybody else. So we've got a lot more work to do, and I feel like I'm screaming into the wind sometimes, and there's not a lot happening, but it just takes time. We saw with the minister, it took from January until now to get any action. So my plan is with the split migrant families, not only split migrant families, but people who are trapped offshore, who were here, who were working, and post-study work visas. And I've been demanding this for a while, but I'm going to start putting the pressure on him even more now, is to say, we need a roadmap. You can't just react because I put pressure on you and choose a small group. What about everybody else? You need to put in place some kind of schedule, even if you don't stick to it, because things happen and COVID flares up. At least people have some hope and some light at the end of the tunnel, that they know that, hey, we're being acknowledged, we're on the list. I know that I'm not going to see my daughter maybe next week or next month, but the minister knows about me, I'm on the list, and when we're able to get to it, we can get to it. The thing that bothers me is that every night in MIQ there's over 1,000 rooms available.
Yep.
So when we launched our campaign to open the Trans-Tasman bubble, another thing the government was dragged kicking and screaming into doing, the reason we did that, or part of the reason we did that, was to free up space in MIQ for Kiwis coming home and for split migrant families. And we thought when they opened the bubble that was a great success, and that would mean that they would be able to bring in cohorts of people. But what they did instead was to say, actually, we're going to close down those hotels, and we're going to mitigate the risk by not allowing more people in. So right now, every day there are 1,000 rooms that are not being used. Now, if you're a split migrant family and you're have for the last year have seen the Wiggles, and there's 12% of everyone who's come in has been from an entertainment background, so Wiggles or Queen tribute bands or nannies or film stars or comedians. Okay. Firstly, you got kicked in the guts because you saw them come in ahead of your children, and now you're sitting there watching all of these hotel rooms every night being completely empty. And I know that's another kick in the guts. We had expected that they would fill those full of your children and your partners, and they haven't. And so that's something that we are going to keep up the pressure and the focus on. There is the capacity, there is definitely the need, but for some reason they're choosing not to do it. And they're creating these groups of people who they believe are more worthy or more valuable or miss their children more or whatever it is, who get to bring their families in, and yet people who I'm dealing with every day, like the ECE teacher I spoke to today and the maths teacher I spoke to yesterday, they can't bring their families. And so it's a pretty unkind, uncaring and unforgiving position to take, especially for a Prime Minister who prides herself on that stuff. And so we will keep up the pressure on that front, and I will keep calling for some kind of roadmap to reunification so that people have a light at the end of the tunnel. I can tell you now, I haven't spoken to a single migrant who has demanded that their family arrive tomorrow. No. Every single one has been so incredibly reasonable and said, I just want to know that it will happen. It might not be tomorrow, it might not be next week, it might not be this month, but it will happen. And that, to me, speaks volumes for those people. Those incredibly hardworking people who are coming to me and just saying, hey, I just want some kind of reassurance, and actually not demanding anything. So that is sort of the first issue that I raised and will continue to raise with the Minister, and you'll see more of that coming. And I know this week in Parliament there is, on Thursday, there is a protest, peaceful protest coming that I will attend, and a lot of my colleagues will attend, and I know that this time, hopefully the Labour MPs will come. I know that they've all been invited, so they have no excuse this time, and I have heard that they are going to turn up with a speaker, which is great, because when they come, they listen and they speak. It means they have to do something. There's more pressure on them, so I'm really pleased that they're going to be there, and hopefully it's Chris Farfoy that comes down to the forecourt. Around the rest of the country, I know that there are candlelit vigils that are happening for not only split migrant families, but for all migrant families who are experiencing hardship for a range of reasons. So if you can go to those, please do, because the more pressure we put on these guys, the more that we turn up, the more we show what a huge cohort of people this is, the more chance that we will have of getting really good media coverage for the first thing, but also pressuring the Minister and the Prime Minister into doing something. So if you can, please attend those. So the second sort of big overarching issue that I'm dealing with is the residence backlog and the frozen EOI queue. Now this has happened for a number of reasons, but the main reason, as far as I can tell, because I don't like answering the questions, is that they've invited record numbers of people to come to New Zealand to work because we're desperate. We need people across all sectors, especially in construction and in healthcare and in education. We need skilled people, so we've invited people to come here. And in some cases, we've paid them to come here. So if you're a teacher, you would have had a relocation grant. So not only did we go out and say, hey, please come to New Zealand, we need you, we paid for you to come here. In 2019, we spent about $1 million advertising to people to come here. So we do all that, and when they get here, the door is slammed shut. And I was speaking to someone this morning who made it really, it's a good metaphor. It's like inviting 1,000 people to a concert, but only actually having 200 places inside, and when they all turn up, just saying to the rest of them, oh, sorry. If you earn a lot of money, you can come in. Yeah. But that's it. So there is this issue that's been growing, and they knew about it in 2018 because the then Minister Ian Lees-Galloway wrote a cabinet paper that said, we know that there is a whole lot of people in New Zealand, and more coming, who are eligible for residence, but we have at the same time reduced the amount of residence places. So it's like, imagine a flood at one end of the bath and a trickle out the other, and that's what's happened. So the residence program numbers, they set a number every 18 months now for how many residence places they will give. That expires in June, and I know that they've already selected more than enough people to meet that target. And so that's why you see them on a huge go slow. So for the whole of April, the whole month of April, they processed 1 week's worth of applications from August 2019. So it's a deliberate, in my opinion, a deliberate go slow, because they know that they're going to meet the targets. And so case officers who used to process 1 or 2 decisions a day are now doing 1 a week, which is a massive drop in productivity. And so the upshot of all of that is that the queues get longer and longer, and I'm about to hopefully put out a graph this week which shows when they went from 6 months to 9 months to a year to 2 years over that period of time. It's just exponentially blown out. And what did they do? They created secret queues that they never told anyone about, so a fast track queue if you earn a lot of money, double the median wage, and a slow queue if you didn't. And that slow queue for a very long time didn't go anywhere. And of course they didn't tell anyone about this, and they've been doing it since at least 2018, at least, until they got caught out last year when they realised that people had clicked and figured out what they were doing, and they put it in their regulations and made it official. But many of you will know that there was the Ombudsman came out and said that is unreasonable and you need to refund people's money if they're pulling out of the queue. So they did a pretty sneaky move. They're still doing it. And all those people who were on work to residence are also dumped into that queue that they never knew that they were. So there's a lot of things going on in the background to try and paper over the cracks of this system that is really broken. It's out of control. So if you're here now, like the teacher I met yesterday at my local primary school, Otea Valley School, came from the UK, and his work visa runs out at the end of this year. And he said, well, I'm not going to get residence. I don't have an application in the EOI pool. It's been frozen for a year. Goodness knows when it's going to open. And even if it does open, when am I going to be selected? And then it's going to take 2 years to get drawn. You know, I'm a young guy. I've got a partner. I want to buy a house. I want to invest in KiwiSaver. I want to be part of this community. And we desperately need him. He's a teacher in a school where that is of a massively growing role. We're desperately short of teachers, especially male teachers. So it's 2 ways. It's terrible for him, the way he's been treated. But it's actually terrible for New Zealand because we need him. We desperately need skilled migrants in this country across a range of industries. So while and that's the point I tried to make about the nurses. It's awful. We shouldn't be treating them like that. But also, we can't have them leave because we need them. We're desperately short of them. And so that's the same with the residents, with these really long backlogs and queues of people who are actually now going, why am I here? Why would I stay here? I could go to Australia or Canada or the UK. My skills are required there and they'll give me residence and they won't treat me like this. Because if we were honest right now, and if I was designing the Immigration New Zealand website, it would say, well, come to New Zealand if you don't want to put an application in for residence, and then if you do get one in, you want to wait 2 years, and if you want to have the country blame you for all of our infrastructure and housing problems, come to New Zealand, it's wonderful. You wouldn't come. That is actually the reality of it. And if we were honest about it, that's what we would call the website. And I know now that on all of those migrant Facebook pages that many of you are part of, you are seeing people saying, oh, I'm thinking about coming to New Zealand, should I? And I've seen these posts, and every single person who posts says, don't come. So we are putting off great people coming. The people who are here, who we desperately need to stay, are thinking about leaving. And we've got a minister saying, we desperately need good, skilled people. Those 2 things don't match. You need to have a good immigration system that treats people fairly, that gives them a pathway to residence that isn't a mile long, that allows them to be able to buy a house and settle here and be part of the community and put their money in KiwiSaver and have a future here, if you want those skilled people to come and to stay. And at the moment there is a huge disconnect. And that's a problem for us. Every single country right now is trying to claw its way out of COVID, the economic destruction that COVID has caused. We're not alone. Canada are doing the same. Australia are doing the same. Countries in Europe are doing the same. We're all going to be after the same people. And right now in New Zealand, I think people in New Zealand think that we're this #1 paradise that everyone wants to come to. That's not the case. And it's getting worse. People would rather go elsewhere and people are looking offshore. We'll all be competing with the same skilled, great people and they're not going to come here. So we've got some issues. If we want to grow, we want to build things, we've got all of these shovel-ready projects that we need to get underway, but we don't have the people. We want to have our children do better in maths and science and STEM subjects, because we're dropping rapidly on those. We actually need really good teachers, and we don't have them. We don't have enough of them. We've got a healthcare sector that is really struggling, not only with nurses, but with specialists and doctors. Why would they come here? You've got to be attractive for people to want to come here, and we are not that right now. Yet we need them here. So my call on the government is to get rid of the backlog. And yep, they might overshoot their residency program numbers, but here's my argument. We just passed a bill in the House last week, giving the Minister another 2 years of his extraordinary powers to extend visas, which we were kind of on the fence about. We understand that, yep, it's quite good to be able to extend visas for whole cohorts of people. But on the other hand, he's got this power he wanted it for 2 years, which is an extraordinary power for such a long time. And what that indicates to me is the border is going to be closed for a lot longer than we think, or that we need to believe.
Yeah.
And probably even more. Right? So if that's the case, then we've got a problem. Not only that, actually, with that bill, I'll get sidetracked for a minute. The other problem with that bill was it's supposed to be for the benefit of migrants, but then he only gives them many of you will have had 3 days notice before your visa expired. You're booking flights, you're getting stressed, you're anxious, and he gives you 3 days notice. It was July last year for those work visa people who are expiring on the 10th, got their notice on the 7th of July. And I know, again, in December when he extended those visas, many people are still here illegally, even though they've had the extension. So none of that's been sorted. So what I'm calling for is for him to get rid of the residence backlog, even if he overshoots the number, because the border's going to be closed for such a long time that we're not going to get the people here to refill the pool. So if you think about people who come to New Zealand, 90% of the people who come to New Zealand to get residence come here first. They don't get residence from offshore, they come here. They need to be here to get the job. So once we've gotten through our queue of residents, where are they going to come from? There will be a few from the residual work to residence. There will be a few who come in on critical purpose, but certainly not enough to refill the pool. So my argument is, look, get through, double the workforce if you have to. I don't know if they actually need to. I think they actually just need to start processing at the rate they were before, and get through the backlog so that people can get their residents back, within 6 to 9 months like they used to. Because one of the issues, there's lots of issues, but one of them is if your child turns 18, what do? They can't go to school, they can't work, they can't even volunteer. And I've got so many children around the country who are repeating year 13. Can you imagine what that does to a kid's mental health? Got to go back to school, back to year 13 for another year, even though you've passed all your courses, you've got to do it again because there's nothing else for you to do. The kid in my lecture who got accepted to med school in 2019 will be sitting playing PlayStation for 3 years because he can't do anything. He can't even go to the hospital and volunteer for the Well Foundation, checking on people to see if they're okay. He can't even do that in case it affects his residence. So I'm calling on the government, A, to get rid of that backlog as quickly as they can, and secondly, to give those kids who turn 18 work rights. Because we can't have thousands of children doing nothing, and that problem's going to get worse. Because if you think right now you're here and you've got a 16-year-old and you haven't even got your EOI in, it's going to take you a couple of years, then it's going to take you another couple of years to get it processed if we continue on the same path. You could have children who are sitting around for 3 or 4 years doing absolutely nothing so they can get in on their parents' residence. So I'm calling for the Minister to give them at least a work visa so they can get out and get some experience and make it so that it doesn't affect their residence under their parents' applications. So those are some of the things we're going to be calling for. I know that there are a lot more issues. I know that there are post-study work visa holders trapped offshore. I know that we've got issues with post-study work visa holders here, students here who can't get their families and their children in. And I've heard lots of stories, but I'm keen to hear more. I'm here to answer all of your questions, and like I say, I'll stick around afterwards as well to talk to as many of you as I can until 1 o'clock when I've got to hightail it back to the airport. So thank you for listening to me have another rant. Thank you for being here and being here in force. And if you do go to some of those candlelit vigils or those protests, thank you for showing up in force, because it actually really does make a difference to this government who care about their image and their kindness image. And if that is shown to not be the case, they don't like it, and they'll do something about it. So your actions really do make a difference. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to